Alright, so as promised, I'm Rick, the commander. I'm here to talk about my prison stories with the Indiana State Prison and South Dakota State Penitentiary. And I'm finally here to talk about Orville Lynn Majors. Orville Lynn Majors was the angel of death. He died September 24th, 2017, and I was there for it. He died at 56 years old. You see me looking down, I'm just looking at notes, but he was a licensed practitioner nurse. He was charged with six counts of murders, but he was suspected of over 200, I believe. He got 360 years in prison, and he was called the Angel of Death. He was sentenced November of 1993, and in September of 2017, I was the last person to see him alive. I was the last person that he had words with. I've had conversations with some of the victims' families. Of course, after my employment at the Indiana State Prison, I wasn't going to do all that while I still worked there, but I felt that this should get out to some of the families and everything. I've talked to a few people on YouTube. Sergeant Orville, no, Lynn, that's what he went by. He went by Lynn. Alicia Smith, I've talked to her on TikTok. Her grandfather was a victim of Lynn Majors, and her and I became friends. I told her 3 months ago about starting a channel, and I was going to start prison talk kind of thing. I really didn't think that Lynn Majors was going to be the first thing I'd talk about, but why not? Let's get it out there. It's one of the craziest stories. Jennifer I Am Holt 2 on TikTok asked me, what is the craziest thing that you've had to deal with working in the Department of Corrections? And I will say probably the death of Lynn Majors was the craziest. I knew Lynn on a personal level. I ran his cell house for 3.5 years. I was the officer in charge. Of course, we had a sergeant. The sergeant went on a 2-week vacation at that point in time. And, excuse me a minute. Like I said, the sergeant went on a 2-week vacation on the time. I think he went to Hawaii or something like that, but that's irrelevant. So when my sergeant went on leave, I was in charge of the cell house and I ran it. So there was an instance on September 24th. We were on lockdown. I think we probably had got a stabbing. I think an inmate lost his life. I don't know. I'd have to look back. But we were on lockdown. We were on lockdown for a good solid 3 or 4 weeks. And Lynn was diabetic. So we had to go and cuff them up at their cell and take them down to the MSU, which is the hospital on the prison grounds. Not outside the prison grounds, on the prison grounds. They have their own medical facility. It's a whole little town in Michigan City. It's a city within the city. A lot of people on here will know that. Yeah, I know my shirt's wrinkly. I apologize for that. But, you know, it is what it is. But we're not here to talk about my wrinkled shirt. We're here to talk about Lynn Majors and some of the stories that I have. But anyway, he was, like I said, diabetic. And we had to go and cuff up the inmates and take them down there to get their injection with insulin or whatever, if they need it or not, you know. And Lynn was on the 100 range on the west side, and he was like the very last cell. No, I think he was like the second or third to last cell on the block. But I went down there with my handcuffs, and I told him, I'm like, Lynn, let's go. We're going to go do insulin checks and Told him to turn around, cuff up. Well, he decided to take his hands and stick them out at the cuff port. And I said, no. I said, I need you to turn around and cuff up. He automatically got really mad. He's like, well, the other day shift, they cuff us in the front. I'm like, well, our commander here, our captain wants us to cuff you all in the back, so I can't speak for the other day shift. So he turned around to cuff up, and he had this cardboard thing on his cuff port because he had a cap. And I was having a hard time cuffing him up, and I ripped it off there. I said, dude, this shit's unauthorized. And he goes, no, it's not. He goes, the warden said I could have it. I said, Warden Neal said you could have it if it does not interfere with my job, and right now it's interfering with my job. So he was getting all mad, and he was mad about it. Finally got through the cardboard, and because I tore it off, and he was pissed about that. But he stuck his hands out in the back to be cuffed up. And I got one cuff on him, and he jerked away, and I said, hey. I said, no. We're going or we're not. And he was just irately mad. And the whole thing was the protection of his cat, keeping it in his cell. You know, they were allowed to have cats there, which I understand. He was pissed about that, but that was besides the point. I still had to do my job. So he was getting like really huffy-puffy, and I told him, and I've known this guy on a personal level for 3-4 years, and he wasn't acting like the guy I used to have conversations with. I would have conversations with this guy, and he would blatantly, like, he would get like in an argument with an older person, and I'd break up the argument or the about to be fight. And Lynn wasn't a small dude. He was probably close to 6 feet tall, probably about 300, 350. He wasn't a small guy. But he was irately mad. And, you know, I said, as long as he's irately mad in his cell, I don't have to get him out. But he said, you know, finally he went, fine, I'll go. He goes, but I got something to say to you when I get out of here. And I went, okay. So, if anybody knows, like, anybody that is diabetic, when their sugar gets low, they just don't act like themselves. He definitely wasn't being the person that he was in prison, the person that listened to everybody, all the staff, did what he was told. He had become compliant over the years since '93. But, well, I got it. I didn't get him fully cuffed up, because then he still turned around and still had one cuff on. And I'm like, Lynn, what are you doing? I said, let's go. I said, we're going or we're not? So I pulled out my OC, and I was getting ready to spray him to get my cuff back. And I gave him a direct order to put his hand back through there, give me his hand so I could take my cuff back. And he just stood there, like, looked at me, and he was, the cell's a 9x9. He was single cell. And he was sitting there, and he was just staring at me, and he started making this sound, and he was pumping himself up. And then he just started doing this. Kind of like he was taking a shit. That's what it looked like, you know. It's just like, dude, what are you doing? So he sat down on the end of his bed, and he sat down, and he kept doing that, and he started rocking like this, and started going, I'm tired of this shit, I'm tired of this shit, I'm tired of everybody, I'm tired of you. And I was just like, okay, we're not going. So I was about to administer a burst of OC at him, and he sat down on the floor, still doing the same thing and rocking back and forth, right? And he finally just, like, looked at me, and his eyes got wide and just, like, deer in the headlights looked, and he went, and he collapsed over. Well, when he collapsed over into his cast litter box. His head, when his man died, his head was in his cast litter box. So I'm sitting here thinking, you know, I'm the only one there on the range at the time. Indiana State Prison, they don't care. We housed 398 offenders and would put 3 people to work in there. They didn't care. But I'm sitting there going, dude, you better be fucking with me. And I kept saying, Majors, get up. Majors, get up. Man, I reached in through the bars and I poked at him. Wasn't moving. So I called an emergency signal on the radio. The first one to respond was my active lieutenant. And I'm not going to name any staff members' names. But I'll just say his first name is John, so Lieutenant John came in. And he came down the range, and he goes, what's going on? I said, Majors collapsed. And he tried calling out the Majors, and I said, I guarantee, I said, this guy's fucking with me. So keep in mind, I kind of took it as a threat when he says, fine, I'll go, but I got something I want to say to you. Well, in the back of my head, I'm sitting here praying to God that this giant dude does not fucking start hammering on me when I open his cell. That's the first thing I thought of. I didn't think the guy was going to die. You know? And the lieutenant opened his cell because being on lockdown, one man can't open a cell. We have to have 2 people to open a cell. So we pulled him out, and he wasn't responsive. He didn't seem to have a pulse. We started chest compressions. The nurses got there from the med unit with a gurney. They ended up hooking up an AED to him. And, you know, and I said administer shock. They administer shock, all clear. As soon as this shock was administered, Lynn Major sat up and went, ah! Pissed his pants, and then fell back down. And we got to sit there and continue doing CPR. So we get him on the gurney. It took like 4 or 5 of us to get him on the gurney. Like I said, he wasn't a small dude. And I had to sit there and continue chest compressions, going all the way up to the front of the hall because they've already contacted emergency services outside of the prison at the hospital. And an ambulance was on the way. So I had to sit there and administer CPR. Well, I didn't breathe into his mouth. I did the chest compressions. The nurse had the little connect thing to do the 2 breaths as I was doing my 30 compressions. We got up to the front of the hall, and this guy was so big, I had to stand on a stool and continue my compressions until the ambulance got there to take him away. And of course, shortly after that, it was like 10 minutes after they took him out, maybe 15, he was pronounced dead at I forgot the name of the hospital. It's a transition hospital in Michigan City, but he was pronounced dead there. That's where they take all the inmates. You know, and that was like my Friday. So I got home and told the girl about it that I was dating at the time. I told her about it, and I actually felt bad. I'm like, dude, I hope this guy doesn't come and haunt me. And I really don't. I understand he caused a lot of harm and a lot of misery to a lot of people. You know, in my law enforcement days, I mean, I've seen people die. I've shot people. I've had I wasn't buddies with the guy at all. None of those guys were my friends. But he knew what I was about, and I knew what he was about. And as long as he did what he was supposed to do, he didn't get no problems from me. You know, you lock in on time. It's count time. It's time to go to bed. It's time to get up. It's time to take your meds. It's time to go to the hospital. He was in tune with that. there's a lot of things that he told me, though, that really bothered me. He would tell me about his victims. He would tell me about them, and it was very unnerving. And he would, like I said, if I had to break up a fight with him and an older person, and finally he'd be like, "Hey, man," he goes, "I'm sorry." He goes, and it would just be an argument. It wouldn't be like anybody swinging fists or nothing. It'd be just an old man argument. And he'd be like, "You know how I feel about old people, Houston." And I said, "Yeah, I get it. I understand. I totally understand how you feel about old people." He would openly tell me, a little potassium chloride wouldn't hurt him. Those kind of things. He would go into detail about some of the patients that he had killed by injecting them with potassium chloride. And it was the ones that were like needy, and it would piss him off. But around the family members, he would pretend to be so caring and so gentle and so loving. But if one of these patients had asked, like, "Hey, I need an ice water," that would piss Lee Majors off. And he would storm out, and he would already start getting his plans in his head to do what he wanted to do. I mean, it's not something that he had to carry out. That was something that he wanted to do. In my mind, he's a monster. The only problem that I had coping with it was, dude, don't haunt me, But like I said, I've reached out to a few people on YouTube about Lynn Majors. Some of the victims thanked me. I'm like, well, I didn't set in motion to have this person die. He just did it while arguing with me. And if anybody wants to check the Wikipedia site, I am Officer R. Houston. I'm the one he was arguing with. That's the cause of his death. So, not a laughing matter, but that's probably the craziest that I have. There's a lot of other crazy stories. There's hundreds, there's countless. And as soon as I learn how to put pictures on here, and I'm just starting this thing. So, anybody has any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. You can find me on TikTok. I'm Injustice416 on TikTok. On here, I'm Commander Rick 78 on YouTube. But yeah, there's in a period of the 8 years in both correctional facilities that I worked in, there's been a lot. So, thank you for listening. Hope you all have a good one.